You want the palette out? This is the very beginning of what we plan to be a companion video to the piece that we did in 3 separate segments this summer on the studio interior in Sheffield, only this is going to be about the human figure. This is the setup. So we're now in my studio in New York. And how did this all begin? It began as a still life that I had set up and planned basically 2 years ago. For various and sundry reasons, including leaks in the ceiling and being away in the summer, I was not able to get to that still life, which is over here. It's the blank over here, which is all worked out in golden section ratios, which we talked about in the interior still life of this summer. You can see the skull, you can see Norman Ader as, you can't see much probably on the film, but you can see that this was all worked out, ready to go, ready for underpainting and grisaille. Well, it didn't happen, and yet I'm not willing to give it up. So the drapery here, the drapery over here, everything you see in here was set up to be a still life. And I decided that I would do a figure piece because I hadn't had an opportunity to get into the figure for a couple of years, and I had this wonderful model. So Stephanie came and I said, well, look, you're a dancer. She reminded me of this the other day. I'd forgotten. You're a dancer, so just get up there and do something. So that is how it all began. And we intend to follow this through to the very tail end as we did with the still life. This is December 9th. A week ago on December 2nd, we went into the map, which now the painting has, the map has been transferred to the canvas, and I'm working in, as we call it, a grisaille. It's a monochrome of raw umber and benzene, thinned out. And you can see that it's beginning to develop in 3 dimensions now. You've got the direction of the crouching figure here, the saint behind Norman Ader, and there she is again over here. Going back to what we said last week, this all began as a dance. I said, you're a dancer, do something. And she got up on the model stand, and I think Norman, the picture of the Franciscan monk was there. And these still life elements were all there, and she did a little dance. She began, I believe she began with a crouch and kind of then moved and went through and then came back down into a crouch, and I said, hey, slow up. Now what are we going to take? And this developed very, very spontaneously. So here we are now at this stage, and I think this reveals a whole lot. First of all, you see very clearly the first 4 lines of the composition, the entrances to the composition, the sides, the top, and the bottom. And you can see in here this rectangle, which in point of fact is the oil painting of the Franciscan monk. It ends down here. Let me get it right here. Right in here. And you can't see that now because it's just in pencil in here. But just imagine this dark rectangle against the rectangle of the canvas. You have, what's important about this is how it's being thought about. It's being thought about as abstractly as if this rectangle within the other rectangle were a painting by Barnett Newman or Mark Rothko or Ed Reinhardt. Shapes. And that thought is going to happen, and it is very abstract and will carry it all the way through the piece. Now, these are particular models, and they will be anatomically functional. They are anatomically functional. They've already been considered from that point of view. But what I'm looking at is the arcs here. Look at that arc, and look at that arc, and look at this arc, and look at how she stands. There's a movement and energy and a thrust up through here, and then it's turned back. Look at the direction of the body, the direction of the heads in here, do you see? Arcs and angles, shapes on a flat canvas. And this, I have to say, in its own way, is not conceived of in the way classical Western painting has been conceived. Out of the head, out of the knowledge of the model, with the particular model added in later aspects and features of it. Again, these figures are anatomically functional. They can all get up and move around and take other positions. You're not going to find that in Western art. This does not come out of Greece or come out of the Renaissance. If we can extend the Renaissance, like Kenneth Clark does, up to Renoir's late nudes, and I believe he died in 1920 or 1918, and Degas, who died 1918 or 1920, whatever it was. The last figures to deal with types, you might say, with a European nude. The particularity of the body is of utmost importance, and I think that scares people in a way, because they're accustomed to the painting being a very nice kind of polite classical figure with recognizable poses sitting in the background and not coming out of the canvas and not engaging you in your space and not being anatomically functional. So this particularity, again, I think it's nicely evident here in the happenstance of the standing pose. Where we'll be next week, I'm not sure, but we'll take that up next week. 17th, 2009, and I have just finished the grisaille underpainting. And I think if you look at some of the details of the figures on the right-hand side or the left-hand side, portions of these, they in a way remind me of dust-bitten, blasted Florentine frescoes of the Trecento, perhaps, something that is suggestive of the form and the direction of the light, but is not detailed. You can't get much detail when you don't have a great degree of value contrast as we have here. So it's now ready to go, and the question is, where will we begin today with Stephanie? Where will I begin the painting? And ordinarily you want to begin where you set up a good tonal contrast, range of tone, to set the key of the painting. And I've been thinking about this, and I think in all probability I will start in this area in here. I have the whiteness of the skull, I have the feet. It will develop very, very slowly, but I want the mass of the darks down here to play off against the upper portions of the left-hand figure. I had considered working up in there, but that's too much of a kind of a culmination point. I would rather set up the darks down in here and get the key established in here. So we will now begin the oil, working directly with color value. I want you to see all kinds of things, like I've taken charcoal and darkened down the edges in here. I have made a correction in the drawing, rather clumsy and crude in charcoal here. I've extended the fingers a little bit. In other words, everything is being worked. I'm lightening up here. Do you see the chalk? But you might think, with three figures involved in here, that I go bit by bit or whole over all at once or whatever I do. nonsense. I don't go at it that way at all. It's so abstract, as you can see in here. I'm not interested in knuckles and joints. I'm interested in pieces of color value, shapes, and I make corrections as I go along. So I see how this is moving in relationship to this. Design within design, this makes it clear. If you take a big piece, like this here, for instance, of Tom Johnson, it isn't so easy because it's all, you might say, finished. I hate that word, but because nothing's ever finished. But you don't isolate things and see that everything has been considered in relationship to everything else. Every color spot in here has been considered in relationship to every other color spot. How high for how wide? What are the angles? These are calculations. These are decisions. You can't go snap with a camera and get that. It's a construction. It's built up. And so I think it really is much easier to see it when it's evolving in here, which is why we're doing this now, because I think frankly a blind man can grasp the designs within the designs as they are evolving here, which will then become part of the whole. And one of the things that is a great, in a sense, problem is that as you identify something and it becomes a human being and you give it a name, this wonderful abstract qualities, which we went into with the space of the painting upside down, which I'm not at all sure will show in a photograph, but this quality of abstraction of the form and the space and the color spots and how they work tends to become subsumed by, oh, it's a nude, oh, it's a male, oh, it's an old man, oh, it's a young woman, oh, it's a whatever it is. You see the what it is taking over, or the thing becoming symbolic. So I can walk past and, oh, I like this guy, or I don't, and walk off, do you see? I never experience a thing. Today is Wednesday, April 7th, 2010, and we are looking at I call it a three-figure piece, a major work that I have been working on. And there are certain points that I want to make out by way of review, or take up by way of review, before I go into the particular way the color spots are handled here and how I handle them. Because it's most important that you understand, that everybody understands that this color spot Hawthorne-Dickinson technique is not a style of painting. It's a way of seeing and organizing and abstracting from the nature color value relationships, and it can be handled in different ways, which I'm going to presently briefly suggest. We're back to the first four lines of the composition here. We're going to zoom in on some details, and you can see that this is all patterns of areas of color value next to each other that are setting up rhythms that have been suggested by a very pale underpainting. Now these are all shapes in relationship to the first four lines. And this is very unconventional way of approaching, especially a major painting like this, because the customary European techniques, whether you're in the Flemish technique in the north and working with tempera, with perhaps an ink drawing, then tempera, and building up slowly, or in Italy or France, underpainting, different ways of underpainting. Usually the painter, especially the painter in oil, begins really all over all at once is the only way you can say. It doesn't matter if you're an impressionist, a Cézanne, or an earlier painter, if you're an Ingres, or all the way back to Raphael and Renaissance painting. It simplifies painting enormously if you have something down. I mean, what I've put down here is I've worked out certain aspects of the drawing which I'm prepared to change. Changes from the nature, widening certain areas, doing certain things. I've worked that out, but the big thing here about the color spots is that you cannot see the color spots unless you are right next door to each other with no white of the canvas in between. And with these earlier forms of painting, let's say you start with a ground of some sort that's colored. The Neapolitans used a red bowl ground. People like Akins would cover, out of the Jerome studio, they'd cover the whole canvas with kind of brown soup, the academic way, and then work the lights and darks. Other painters will work abstract large areas from the nature and basically cover the canvas very quickly. But if you do that, imagine seeing any of these colors and the subtle changes of warm and cool in these browns, for instance, or these blues in here. If you had it against a whole large field of painting, you just wouldn't be able to record them. And I've done that myself. I've worked with toned ground, I've worked with colored underpainting, I've worked with an acrylic underpainting handled like watercolor underneath the oil. It simplifies problems, it makes the whole thing easier, but it doesn't give the precise observed nuance of nature, which I rely on, using natural light, which I rely on to communicate sensations of form and space, what Bernard Berenson called tactile values and space. This painting began with a sketch. The model came and took a series of poses, and between us we felt that we had something going here. This is the same model in two poses. I made this sketch in 2 or 3 minutes, whatever it was. And you can see we have the first 4 lines of the composition, 1, 2, 3, 4, or however you want to call it, and that I saw here that I had to have more space, as you see up there, so I've made an addition. I did the sketch with the finder, as is my custom. And then, having determined the size of the canvas, now if you come with me. I know you can't not get as far away as you'd like to get this all in, but if you can pan it and get the idea of the map here, which I worked out carefully with charcoal on vellum, which I could then transfer with graphite on the other side in barest outline form, not a drawing as a map, a placement of shape. Again, everything in reference to the first 4 lines of the composition. We can now go to the final painting. Well, now we come to the completed painting, and the big difference between the map and here, it seems to me, is perfectly apparent. The map is absolutely flat. It deals with the flat arrangement of shapes and their pattern on the canvas. In the final painting, you are dealing with form, 3-dimensional form, and space, the illusion of them. Now, let's look at this entire figure. It's a very, very interesting pose. It hasn't been created out of my head, it's been created by the model, and what I enjoy about it is it's full of thrusts. I feel that you're going in to the, she's shifting her weight. She's not static, and that brings up the whole question of movement in painting. Of course, the figure is not moving physically, but in a psychophysical way, if you let your eye take it in, you will see what its movement amounts to, and you can sense in your own body what she's doing. Take the compression of this leg, for example. Here it's emerging into light. All of this is a kind of a cave of darkness in here. Anatomy in the hands of an artist is not something that you trundle out like so much knowledge. It's a case of how you use it. And if you can come in, perhaps on this area in here, if you squint down in the painting itself, you'll see that this is a glow of color in the cools of the background, down here and over there. And she emerges out of here. And I found when I was painting this, if I paint the inner condyle, of the femur in there, I draw anatomical attention to something which is not what I want. I want this great kind of ballooning, interesting shape of the weight of the body pressing down on the lower leg in here. That is something, again, that this kind of choice is the choice that a painter works with. Again, the photographer, to make that analogy, cannot make this kind of very high selective choice. So anatomy is not a thing to be copied. And if we can focus down on this hand here, that hand I left is virtually a block in, you might say, blops of paint. It isn't a hand of knuckles and joints and everything all worked out in detail. It's left the way it is because it catches the light and it doesn't call attention to itself. It allows the eye to go on up in here, carry up into the thrust of the upper body. If I knuckled and jointed it here, the same thing as if I'd hit the condyle in here, I would have pulled the eye to that. So this type of selective use of anatomy and handling in the paint is just very much a part of the game. And it is very, very different in these spots of color, these color spots, from classical painting. If we can now go over and I'll show you the Raphael hand. It's worth taking a look at a painting in which everything is worked out knuckles and joints wise, again with great selection. But this is a very famous painting by Raphael of La Fornarina. And if you look at the hands in here, you can see that they are modeled in the classical way, light to dark, and drawn out. And really following Raphael does much the same thing in the 19th century. And the whole figure is really an idealized nude. If you can compare that with the figures that I've painted in here, the selection process has happened very much in the studio with a pattern and an idea of kind of ideal form. Not to say that there isn't a great selectivity, again, in what has been stressed and what has been left behind. Let's see how one looks at the painting, because every painting doesn't call for being looked at like another painting necessarily. And in my work, I want you to move around. Classical painting is based on a single position, a station point by which everything in perspective comes together to a point, and when you stand there, it's like looking through a pane of glass into a box of space. I don't do that. In point of fact, I break the perspective, as you can see here. There is no way that this orthogonal and that over here, these diagonal lines will ever meet in a single point on the horizon. And I do this intentionally because I don't want you to be frozen. I need you to look at the paintings like this up close to see these very abstract pieces of color and the texture of the paint and enjoy it that way, and then far back. Because in the way this is worked, things come together in the eye when you're back from the painting. It's not like the Raphael. This is something that you need to be moving around. And furthermore, I want you to see it from left and right and up close and far back. And I want you to get the sense of its space as not being locked into a single station point, you see, but as freeing you to move about. That's part of the experience of the painting, and it's much more, to me, close to life than the classical view, which locks you in behind the picture plane. So we come back to the beginning again, the particular model. And Kenneth Clark was very strong in making a distinction between the naked and the nude. And the naked, he talks about the model as being the shapeless, pitiful creature that the art student draws. He had no idea, to me, that one could take the particular model and elevate the model into the nude. And the particularities of these figures are based on the particular individual person. That is not Raphael, a Renaissance painting. It is not 19th century painting. It is not Courbet grafting onto the ideal model of his folds of flesh, or Manet making references to Raphael compositions. I say that this is the principal station point that I'm showing you now. The easel is here, where there are tape marks on the floor. You see backed up there. And the painting is either down on the floor or up on those two egg crates there, long ways up. And I have another box somewhere around that I stand on if necessary to raise my station point higher. So I'm making adjustments, and there are multiple station points, but the principal position is here where I'm standing now. Now, of course, I don't have room to back away from the painting over there, but here, so I'm doing all of this work. My cone of vision only takes in a little tiny portion, so I'm always carrying it out with Stephanie to the bench out in the living room, do you see, out in the dining room where the painting is now. Brushes, drop handle knives. All right.
Where are your brushes?
Well, they're all behind me, you see.
Oh, I see.
Close at hand. Very abstract spots and things. So it attracts it from the beginning, from the sketches to from the first day. And we have a lot of stills, I think. You know, the days that we didn't use a video, but she took a picture. So here was this painting beginning. So we've attempted to document it from the word go, from the initial sketch from the first day, at various points all the way through. And here we are, painting virtually complete. It may not be the last time you're here, in a working capacity too, but for practical purposes we'll consider it.
Finished.
Here we are.
Mm-hmm.